look, let's face it, Eric. You could use some help being a little bit more cool.
Yeah, it's true.
This is our chance to make you more popular
right.
in the industry.
Winning a 6-scale miniature painting competition makes me cooler.
It does.
That's what I love about the Lights Out podcast. Are you painting dragons? Are you painting space marines? It depends on the time of day, the month, what I'm working on at that point in time.
Which girl you're trying to impress that week.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Lights Out podcast, where we talk about what it really takes to build a high-performance automated machine shop that runs smarter, not harder. I'm your host, David Vuick, and today's episode is a special one. My co-hosts, Eric and Nick, just got back from EMO in Germany. The world's largest international metal manufacturing technology show, guys?
I think it's probably right there with IMTS on the Western world, and then I think China has a monster show too. But
okay,
let's just say it's the world's largest because no one's probably going to check.
If you're in the CNC or manufacturing game, EMO is a vision of the future in terms of all the major OEMs, automation suppliers, software companies. They're all there bringing their A game to kind of showcase what's next in terms of all of that technology, digital transformation, machining, robotics. I'm sure there is some AI stuff because that is all the rage these days. And so today we're going to break down what really stood out from that show, what trends are shaping the next generation, and kind of what technology is like ready for the shop floor, maybe which technologies need a little more time to bake, and kind of what your kind of key observations were. So first things first, guys, what was your overall takeaway from EMO this year?
Yeah, I'll start. I want to ask Eric this question, see what he says, and then I'll give you my answer. But Eric, what do you think the biggest difference between IMTS and EMO are, if you had to say? Yeah,
the number of Germans attending would be my first answer. No.
That is probably true. The EMO's edging out the IMTS a little bit with that one, especially when it's in Hanover.
The biggest thing I always take away from EMO is, you really get a much truer sense of who's out there in the world. Like, I remember my first EMO, I thought I was like this work holding genius. And then you walk into EMO and you learn about like 8 competitors you had no idea were even in the space internationally, right? So that's something that always really jumps out at me, is just the amount of businesses in our industry, people in our industry that you just don't see on a day-to-day basis domestically.
Yeah, my answer is going to be very similar. It's just the amount of OEMs. For those that don't know our business, Hennig and AME, what we do is we build products that are peripheral to machine tools. And so it's totally different in the US because most of the technology originates in Europe or Asia, in like Japan or Korea, and makes its way over through importers to North America. And, we've got a couple North American machine builders, but there's like hundreds, it feels like, over there at the EMO. So yeah, just the amount of OEMs, the amount of competitors we have that are there. There's probably 3 or 4 main competitors in some of our groups at the IMTS, but then at the EMO, it seems like every time I go in, there's a new competitor, kind of like what you just said, Eric. It's wild. So yeah, that's probably the biggest difference for me.
Almost makes me feel, really good to someone who's been in like sales leadership for quite a few years, trying to break into some of those markets. It can be really challenging, right? And then I think you go over there and you see the amount of people you didn't know about that clearly haven't broken into the United States or Canada or even Mexico for that. So it's a little comforting, I guess, that it's not just us.
Yeah. So, Dave, what was your thoughts about the EMO? How did you enjoy your time?
How dare you, sir? You know I wasn't there.
They put a really high tariff on Canadians.
Yeah, no, they don't let Canadians go to EMO. It's kind of some weird rule, I guess.
No, it was cool. I do remember calling you a few times being like, this is what we're seeing over here. Or we had a big text thread about just kind of similar technologies and competitive technologies and stuff like that. So that's what we'll get into in a minute here.
Absolutely.
Nick, I know you're probably at EMO like more or less every time. Eric, you've probably been a bunch of times as well. Like, any like particular things that stood out this year that just hasn't been there in past years?
No, I mean, as far as I think what you're seeing is certain sectors larger than they were last year. I mean, you touched on some of it in the intro, right? We see a lot more AI. You see a little bit more software, smart manufacturing technology, advanced manufacturing, things like that, automation.
Yeah. I'd say it's pretty similar to what you see at the IMTS. News travels fast. The amount of OEMs is the biggest difference, but as far as the technology on display, I'd say it's pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
So Eric, what jumped out to you as far as like conversations with people at the booths and kind of like what's going on in the market over there and stuff?
The three big takeaways I would say, from EMO, and I think things we're going to expand on here in this episode, because I really do think that there are things the industry needs to be aware of and needs to start contemplating, right? I don't know if action's necessarily required. We'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But number one would be, we had some OEMs talking about seeing a significant shift from horizontal machining centers to 5-axis machining centers. Number two would be certain OEMs who have had technology kind of exist natively in their base offering, right? So you buy a machine tool and you get a certain level of machine monitoring, right? Or you get a certain level of maybe even adaptive controls included in the purchase price. They noticed that they largely went unused and they thought it was negatively impacting machine tool sales. So the thought was, they're actually going to remove some of that technology from their base package to kind of have a more attractive initial sticker price, right? And then number three would be so many companies offering machine tool monitoring. I mean, an insane amount, but very few actually offering like those that have a good ERP interface, right? IoT, adaptive control, tool optimization, plugins like that. So those were the three big takeaways that I think we need to talk about on today's episode.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that first one because for a company that makes a lot of tombstones, that can be a little discouraging.
Just a little.
Pretty much horizontals is really what we got to hope for if you want to sell a lot of tombstones. And I've been hearing that a lot from a lot of people. Like it's changing. And I guess one comment from a Korean builder was, when we used to go visit the mothership where all these machines are produced and assembled, there was a bay that had maybe 10, 20, 30 horizontals being constructed at all times. And the last time I went, this is from the guy telling me, he's like, there was like 2 and they were both for the US to come to us. I was like, really? Wow. So I'm like, well, why is that? Well, I think there's a couple reasons maybe why some of these shifts are happening in Europe. And it's not just Europe, but number one, like the economy over there, the manufacturing economy is really, really going through some tough times. So money's super tight for a lot of people who would purchase this equipment and they need to get more with less. And so they need multi-axis machine tools or, just not big, heavy duty, expensive horizontals. Those are typically associated with a lot of work. And the number 2 reason is that it's just easier and more approachable to get a 5-axis mill than ever before.
I would say, even like setting them up can be a lot easier, a lot less time consuming.
Yeah, because you don't have to think about hiring Flippy Long Stocking to move the part a bunch of times.
Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, honestly, when you go from 4-axis to 5-axis, right, and the majority of your horizontals, I think, are synonymous with that, right? You do get improved part access. It does reduce the number of operations or the part handling, which is huge,
Yeah. There was a big announcement recently that one of the most prominent machine builders in the horizontal category was just sold. So you guys know who I'm talking about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and I've heard some numbers. I won't share any of them because I can't validate. But the price that I heard it was sold for was a lot less than I would have expected for a company like Heller. And so, yeah, for those that don't know, Heller was acquired by DN Solutions, and I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so if there's less horizontals, then why is there that strategic shift by one of the largest machine tool builders in the world to make that acquisition? Maybe they found a great opportunity and they got a great price for it. Maybe they just want to dominate that market by, acquiring one of the leaders in the category. But it seems like if horizontals in general are kind of shrinking in comparison to other machine configurations, then wouldn't be the time to go out and buy a big horizontal machine tool OEM. But I have actually heard from some other builders that they're still selling horizontals. So
Yeah.
it's not like they're obsolete or they're going away or we're never going to see them again.
Certain people are going to be better in certain spaces, right? So, I mean, you and I could probably list 5 to 10 OEMs right now that are probably more synonymous to us with horizontal machining than some of the other ones, and vice versa for 5-axis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be if they have a smaller, limited horizontal product offering and they want to break into that space further, maybe there's some large end users out there that are big heller shops, right? They want to capture some of that business. I'm sure it exists and has pockets and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts when you hear this, Dave? Is it surprising to you, or are you like, nah, it's kind of what I would expect with as the industry evolves?
I mean, I think it makes sense. I think there's always going to be like certain applications, certain industries where a horizontal is going to make sense for the application, right? And so that those horizontals are always going to sell. But there's also, a big segment of the market where that flexibility of a 5-axis just makes a ton of sense because it just allows you to pivot. And if you got to take on maybe a different type of work in a hard time that's kind of outside your typical wheelhouse of what you have been doing, 5-axis is going to give you some flexibility to do that. I mean, you're talking about how Europe is maybe going through some tougher times. I'm sure that kind of ability to pivot is important to those folks.
Mm-hmm. And we should be clear. Like, there's 5-axis horizontal milling machines too.
Mm-hmm.
They just come with a super high price tag. And typically, when I think horizontal machine tools, I think there's a high volume of work happening, and so yeah, like if things are slow over there, it's like, okay, how do I get more with less? And the 5-axis mills that we're all thinking about right now are typically those like vertical, trunnion style, where you're able to access all sides of the part and make 1, 2, 3 parts complete in one cycle. And that's kind of what we've been talking about a lot lately on Lights Out. It's a big part of why we came to market with the automated workflow from Hennig, where it's loading and unloading that type of 5-axis mill and allowing people to run lights out and stay ahead of their machine like we've talked about in previous episodes. But yeah, I mean, there's 5-axis horizontals as well. And
sure.
I think in general, what we'll see and what we've seen historically and what we'll continue to see is more like multitasking machines that can do more in one setting.
Absolutely.
I think that also connects to like how hard it is, not just in the US. This is another observation for me, but pretty much everyone I talk to in the world is struggling to find really talented folks. When you're struggling to find really talented, skilled tradespeople, then you need to be kind of one and done as much as possible, because every time you have to adjust, there's opportunity for human error. And it seems like the humans make a lot more errors now than they used to.
Yep. To piggyback off that, like when you look at like a horizontal machining center and like the automation that's available, right? It tends to, your choice is a pallet pull, right? And when you look at a 5-axis, you really do get like, there's a lot more like diversity there for what you could choose to run lights out to kind of help with that skills gap. I mean, there's really something for every budget, right?
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, let's talk to the next point that you made about like maybe scaling back what's offered in the base machine tool sale as far as like standard options.
Yeah, that was really interesting to hear. So this wasn't something we heard third party. This was a large OEM that told us that, in an effort to bring their sticker price down, they were going to remove like at least like any sort of adaptive control technology because they sold it with the machine and nobody used it. So you've got, they're a very large market share, in my opinion, that has this kind of exist natively and no one's using it. And I'm curious why.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
It doesn't seem like a win for our industry, does it? That they bought this technology. We all know how powerful it is, and it sits dormant to the point where the OEM's like, get rid of it.
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference between like intentionally buying the technology and buying the technology because you bought a machine tool that came with the technology. Dave, we talk all the time about we're in that category. That's why me and Eric are going over there doing that research. We talk all the time about the importance of coaching and really like making sure that those that have bought that technology are getting the most out of it and understanding how to use it, because you can make a part without adaptive controls. Like you can finish the race just driving the car on the road, but are you going to take first place?
I think you also hit on a really important point there that I think is connected to the lack of adoption is if it just came on the control by default and it wasn't, a deliberate decision that, hey, we need this solution to improve OEE or improve throughput or whatever, they're not bought into the idea of actually implementing it. And frankly, once they have that new machine tool landed, their goal is just to get it making chips as quick as possible, and then they're going to move on to the next fire. So probably a lot of folks haven't even looked at some of those native installed monitoring solutions from the OEM. And I'd even hazard a guess too, at the end of the day, you want some kind of a single source of truth of intelligence for your business operations. And if that technology on the control, and I don't know a ton about the OEM monitoring solutions, but if it's not playing nicely with with the rest of your tech stack, with your MES or your ERP, and that data kind of has to live in a silo, it's not actually adding a ton of value then to the rest of your operation. Or if you need to hire someone to kind of make a custom integration so that happens, that's another layer of friction. So it just goes unused, and unused features that you're paying for is just waste. So
sure,
it's surprising because you don't often hear about machine tools being offered with less technology than they used to, but it's not surprising because I think you see this with software solutions all the time where when there's a lack of buy-in, it just doesn't get utilized and it's just wasteful in the end. So it makes sense to me. I think it just really points out the need for some kind of a unified way for that, manufacturing intelligence to really inform what the team is doing so they can make better decisions. Data that lives in a silo isn't going to help anybody.
Yeah, you got to turn that intelligence into real continuous improvement.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, too, I think if I hear you correctly, David, it's a cultural decision to a certain extent. So just because you bring in, we see it all the time, in the work holding game where, a shop owner will invest in self-centering vices, but he didn't get the team on board. So you walk in 6 months later and the stuff's still on a pallet sitting in boxes. Right. So I guess it's that on a little more technological scale, I surmise.
Yeah, I think, it reminds me of like the early days of CRM, as a sales leader. It's kind of like the main deal that we operate in, the main software solution that we operate in. And it's like, I remember when we selected the ERP we're currently using, we were like, hey, we really need these CRM features. And they're like, oh, we have a great CRM. It's built in. And everyone has a CRM built into whatever they're offering. But like what they mean by that in most cases is like, yeah, like you can email your contacts or like you can log notes about your sales call or whatever. And then you compare that to a solution that was made for customer relationship management and made to work with the most modern marketing tools. Like we use HubSpot. It's probably one of the more popular in the category. And that was like designed for a specific purpose. And so if you connect that to like the machine tools, everyone wants to have everything that everybody else has. Like, so if the competitor has this technology, well, then we have to have that as well. But really what we find, Eric and I are constantly talking to machine tool builders about what their goals are. And they're like, we just want to sell the machines. Like, we don't even want to get involved in all this other stuff that's peripheral to it. We, in many cases, don't want to offer like a full turnkey package that includes the work holding and the tooling and everything else, because like that could mess up the deal and we're experts on the machine and we just want to focus on that instead of like the total long-term solution for the customer. And so like same thing with when they're building the machine, they're like, well, we need adaptive controls. So it's just going to be this kind of appendage in our offering. And maybe they're not doing the same level of like customer feedback research and really making sure that it works. And I think the second thing that's super important is, I don't know how many shops you've been into that have only one brand of machine tool.
Not many.
There are some.
But like usually they make it work for their brand of stuff. and not
Sure.
necessarily connecting to every other piece of equipment there.
Yeah.
So you can't get like the full holistic understanding of how your machine's performing. All your machines are performing if, only some segment of your machine tools have that technology that you're utilizing.
That's a great point. And so I think, just to summarize this point, because I believe the designation is very important to what we're talking about today. It's not, in your opinion, David, Nick, it's not that the industry isn't ready for the technology. It's that that delivery mechanism is probably not the best.
Yeah, it's a really good way to say it.
Yeah, I think the biggest hole there is like the change management piece. And we talked in the last episode, Nick, about coaching, and there's a lot of overlap there. But it's getting your team ready for that change, and then enabling them with the technology so that they're confident to use it and have that drive, the performance of the business. That's where I think there's a hole right now that needs to be filled. And yeah, again, some kind of a unified, you want all your machines singing off the same song sheet, basically, is, because
for sure.
rather than just knowing what a certain spindle is doing in my shop, I want to understand the whole process, and if the Op1 machine is, I don't know, a Mori, and the Op2 machine is a, Doosan or whatever the case might be, but I only get data from the Op1 machine and not the Op2 machine, then, there's a hole in that process information.
For sure.
Yeah.
Is a good metaphor, and I'm sorry that I always circle this back to work holding, but that's really my job on the Lights Out podcast. But is a metaphor like you walk into some of these shops and you see the brand new 5-axis machine with the old traditional dinosaur vise bolted to the table? Like, just they've accepted the fact that, we get this 5-axis machine, but like the culture of like upgrading everything around it hasn't.
I think it's a perfect metaphor, actually, because we've just talked about that on an episode with Mike and Paul. And Paul was talking about this shop that just blew his mind. And he's like, they had all these really nice, I think they were Matsuras, but then it was like a single lock, like tombstone with one vise on two sides. Like, that's what you're doing?
Johnny Cheater Bar walking up with the mallet and the pipe to make sure everything's tight. Yeah.
Johnny Cheater. We got to make like a cartoon with all these characters and these names we make up.
Yeah.
I think realistically, you have to consider how many changes do you want to take on at one time? If that's your first 5-axis, the first thing you got to understand is, how are we going to run this new machine? Because this new machine runs different than, let's say, our 3-axis machines that we're used to. There's a change in how you're programming that machine that requires some learning. And then, there's the change in the work holding as well. So, I think I can extend a little grace to the folks who are running a dinosaur vise on a 5-axis, kind of in that first period when they're kind of making the adjustment, but totally understand that at the end of the day, if you want to maximize the value, you gotta kind of commit to the 5-axis way.
Therein lies the difference between a Canadian and an American. David is willing to extend you that grace to use dinosaur vices on your new 5-axis. I, however, am not.
Yeah, I will make fun of
today.
Well, I won't say it's justified. I'll say that I can understand why it happens. So I'll put it that way.
No, absolutely. No, I'm totally joking there. Well, great input, guys. Wow, that was some powerful stuff right there.
I actually think you shouldn't offer all of this advanced technology as a standard. Because if you're on the consumer side and you could check a box to add that option because you want to pay for it because you're going to use it, like, why wouldn't you just be like, well, I can get it this way, instead of like the overall price being higher? Someone's got to get paid for the tech. So offering it as a standard, it almost hurts adoption because the lesser percentage of it gets fully utilized. I mean, Dave, you're from the SaaS world more than we are, and how important is retaining a customer?
It's extremely
long term.
Yeah.
Right. So churn is the devil, right? So if you're just giving people technology that they didn't ask for and they're unlikely to use, then the overall adoption of the technology is going to be less. I don't think that's the right way to do it.
But also, I think from the perspective of serving the customer, I mean, do you guys like paying for stuff you don't use? I don't.
No,
I actually love it. See, in the miniature painting world, we call that a pile of shame. So,
we have
I've got a
sidebar
giant
here.
pile of shame.
You also have a brand new Dragonfall trophy I mean, we're talking about
actually.
painting miniatures.
All
and I
right,
think
it's
this is
time for the
important.
lights out intermission where we talk about Eric.
I do. I think it's important to let everybody know because, like, look, let's face it, Eric. You could use some help being a little bit more cool.
Yeah, it's true. That
and
is,
so, like, this is our chance to make you more popular
right.
in the industry.
Winning a 6-scale miniature painting competition makes me cooler.
It does.
That's what I love about the Lights Out podcast.
And you have a trophy too. Is
I
it
have
near you?
two
Can you
trophies.
show the trophy or no?
I did not bring the trophy to work today.
You usually do, right?
I usually they bring them everywhere I go. But yes, thank you for bringing that up,
4-year-old
gentlemen.
with his action figures that he can never let go of.
Exactly. The wife loves it when I just set them on the top of the shopping cart at like Target, No.
So good though, dude. I love that about you. You're just like unapologetically Eric, and you love to paint. Was it Warhammer?
Yeah.
Was that the one?
I'll paint Warhammer 40K is a hobby of mine, and I paint it's models. You build the army and you paint it up. And then also, as you know, an avid Dungeons and Dragons player, and that also requires the use of miniatures. So I paint those too. So it's really, are you painting dragons? Are you painting space marines? It depends on the time of day, the month, what I'm working on at that point in time.
Which girl you're trying to impress that week?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So good.
As proud as we are of Eric, and in all honesty, Eric, you sent some pictures. Your figurines,
Nurgle army.
Nurgle arm. Sorry, I don't know why I forgot that. It is actually incredibly impressive, the detail. But I don't think our audience necessarily needs to know that much more. If you do want to know more, look up Warhammer or get in touch with Eric directly. But there was a third big takeaway, guys. You want to talk about?
Thank you guys again for acknowledging. It makes me feel special. But David is right. Time to move on. So number 3 big takeaway from EMO: so many companies offering machine tool monitoring. I mean, mind-boggling amount of people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where it tends to stop. We spent 2 days really just going around learning about these companies, and the amount that are offering like the more advanced solutions like a ERP plugin, that IoT being able to pick up some of those tertiary functions that exist outside the machine tool, and tool optimization / adaptive controls, very, very, very limited amount of people. So the questions I have for you two is, does this mean you should just avoid basic monitoring because there's so much of it? And I think number 2 would be, how should this influence your buying decision when you're like in the market for trying to get better data?
Bam, that's a big question.
Yeah, the first one, avoid basic monitoring. Actually, I think it says the opposite. It's available to you in as many flavors as Baskin-Robbins. So why don't you just use some very affordable solution to get an understanding of your current state? We have kind of a lean culture here at our company, and you always need to know your current state before you can like really show the gap between where you want to be and where you are. It's not hard to get a current state understanding of some basic like availability metrics for where most people start. What's your spindle utilization? How often is the machine running when it should be? And things like that. There's probably technology in your shop already that, it's as simple as like flipping a switch and you're starting to capture that. So I would say no, like you shouldn't avoid basic monitoring, but I think where I'm headed is we often like don't think about the result, the actual like result we're trying to achieve when we implement monitoring. And so you're like, okay, cool. Like it'll tell me what my machine's going to do. And, we're in this category, but we're really not that excited about monitoring because so many people are doing it. We're excited about all the ways to improve the current state and get to the end result.
Yeah.
And so it's more like, well, once they have that understanding and they've defined their gap between where they are and what their target is, what are we going to do about it? So that's why we get so much more excited about coaching. We get so much more excited about monitoring all the things that can shut down your lights out hours, like all the coolant conditions and all the other stuff that like the pull force in your spindle, like where your filters are at, all of that stuff that nobody thinks about, your chip control, your tool life. Like these are all the things that really shut you down and kill those lights out hours that you were so excited to achieve. And oftentimes the monitoring doesn't expand beyond just the basic, but I don't think that means you should avoid the basic.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a great thing that there's so many options. Your excuse to just simply not get started is pretty small.
Yeah.
Like, just jump in.
Yeah, and then just the second part, and then I'll let Dave give his 2 answers. But the second part for me is like, so how should this influence your buying decision? Well, you should think about what's next after you've achieved basic monitoring, and what you want long term as the solution, and what you want your shop continuous improvement culture to be like. That's before you make a decision. Like maybe the monitoring you chose will only ever work on a third of the machines in your shop. Well, you're not going to get like a full view of your shop, or maybe it will only ever be this. And so you should think about like your long-term goals and what you want your entire company to be like as you make the decision to monitor more than just the basics. Dave, how would you answer those questions, brother?
Oh, man. So, I mean, there's a lot I could say here. I don't get as excited about monitoring as I do about increasing capacity, which would be like revenue capacity, and lowering your operating costs, which improve your margin, and improving your on-time delivery and your quality. And I think that's what it's really about. And so that's where monitoring can help. So if those are the objectives, how do you engineer your way to achieving those? And it's with monitoring, because now you can measure your process, you can understand where the gaps are, and you can make improvements that lead there. To your point, Nick and Eric, you made this point too. There's so many options out there. So you have no excuse. You can find a low-cost basic monitoring solution and start essentially running some experiments, right? And then build from there. Again, I would say find something that integrates well with the rest of your tech stack if possible. I think the reason that people can struggle with adoption is you need to have the people on your team that can champion this. And I think that we're kind of in this transition now where shops are taking things like ERP and MES and monitoring more seriously, but you really require someone on your team who can integrate all of this. You need an integrator. And software companies typically don't provide this. They'll give you the tools, but you kind of need to have dedicated bandwidth. And I kind of wonder, is that a role on the machine shop team that has never really existed historically, but now needs to exist for businesses to get this value? Is hiring a dedicated champion to integrate these types of technologies like monitoring, almost like a business ops kind of person? What do you guys think? Is that kind of a hole in the hiring plan that, maybe as standard needs to be kind of filled going forward?
Yeah. So 2 thoughts. I think that continuous improvement is everybody's job, but it still should be somebody's job. Like that's all they do is continuous improvement. So, everybody has to buy in and support the continuous improvement, but we have like continuous improvement employees at our company that's what they do. They focus on one initiative to the next. And as you were talking, I was just thinking like no customer's ever been like, man, I really need the suppliers to have monitoring. Like I want my suppliers to have monitoring. They don't think about that. They think about, I want parts to show up on time. I want them to be in tolerance. I want a shop that can scale with me. I want a shop that can be competitive. And so like monitoring can deliver those results, but if you make it about the monitoring and not the results, then you're going to struggle. And that's exactly what continuous improvement people do. They connect like technologies and people and all the change management with how all of that mixes to a business result that ultimately your end customer cares about. And now everybody's like using the monitoring and caring about the monitoring and thinking about, okay, like how do we close this gap between where we're at and where we need to be?
I honestly, David, you said something that kind of gave me chills, right? And, just is this becoming like a standard position on the shop floor? I mean, I love whenever that happens in the industry, right? It's ebbed and flowed so much just in my short tenure, right? I mean, if you think about the roles, whether it's maintenance, operator, machinist, I mean, even like the amount of places you walk into that used to have like dedicated tool room people, and with kind of the evolution of work holding, those are getting smaller and smaller and kind of going away, right? But I love what you said, David, and I think it gives people a lot to think about, right? Is the evolution of the shop floor staffing, is that changing?
Mm-hmm. I have two examples kind of in this category. Two businesses trying to solve the same problem. I won't list who they are just to protect the innocent here, but ultimately, like, what was different is their pricing model mostly. And one was more approachable. It was that I mentioned earlier, software as a service. In this case, it's like, I don't know, like machine tool condition monitoring and as a service. That's an acronym that nobody's ever going to use. But the it, it it was in the category that we're kind of in right now, where it's, how are we monitoring what's happening with the coolant, and not just saying, okay, here's where you're at with your coolant concentration, your temperature, your coolant levels, your chip being full, chip bin being full, but it was like, it'll detect that, and like those fancy pools at a hotel, it'll self-correct and like adjust the chlorine and get the mixture right. So it was this monitoring and then like self-correcting solution. And one of the fanciest machine tool builders in the world, it was out there offering that, and it was like a one-time fee per machine of, it was over $12,000. And they were like, we actually abandoned the project because nobody wanted to pay for that.
Wow.
And then, Eric and I went to another booth, and they were offering the same solution, but they were doing it as a per machine per month subscription. So it's a lot more approachable, and you can try it. And if you don't like it after 6 months, you can ship the system back to them. That's an easier pill to swallow, especially in tough times.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need to think beyond just like the product and like the technical attributes of the product, and also the commercial innovation with how we're offering our products and how we're charging for it.
Lower the barrier to entry, lower the perceived risk, all that good stuff.
That's actually a really interesting point, Nick. I like that a lot. Yeah. I mean, I know from my own experience, this can evoke some emotions among shop owners when you start to talk about like one-time purchase versus subscription software. Because I know subscription software can get out of hand, but to your point, lowering that barrier to entry. So now you can use the technology, and rather than it costing, just for like random numbers, like a $25,000 initial purchase, you can start for $4,000 for the first year. That's a lot easier, especially when you're managing cash flow problems, as opposed to having to make that one lump sum payment on the front end. So it's food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people want choice. So they want to be able to choose, can I pay for it up front or pay in like one lump sum, or am I required to subscribe to it? I think especially initially, if you're offering a solution to the industry and you're considering like, how do I offer it as a subscription? Maybe it's, don't totally remove the ability for someone to buy it outright. Maybe it's I think in time we'll see more subscription oriented value propositions than you do today, but I think people want the choice. If you're giving them the choice versus saying, okay, now this is the only way to buy it, I think you'll find a more receptive customer.
I agree.
Awesome. I had a big picture question for you guys.
Ooh.
Are you ready for it? So based on what you kind of witnessed at EMO and a lot of what we've been talking about, do you think that machine tool OEMs are properly estimating the importance of data-driven manufacturing for the future?
Yes. I think that much, like what we talked about just a few moments ago, I think they understand the importance. I think they understand the culture. I think they're trying to find the best delivery mechanic. And I mean, maybe that is a third-party specialist, especially if they're not gaining a lot of traction with just having it, natively exist. So, but I do believe they understand very well the importance of that data-driven.
Yeah, I mean, you see it. So like, it's in all their messaging, it's in all their marketing, like, capture more data and use more data. And then you see it in so many of the booths. But I just think that's not necessarily the problem that they solve. And it's not necessarily the business model that they built, is to be on that like software continuous improvement side. And so they don't really have, they're not really staffed accordingly. They don't really have like coaches that help you run continuous improvement programs in your company. Their business is based on selling machines. And if you have a successful customer that's already buying from you and they're growing, they're going to buy more machines. So you can kind of back into it that way. But no, I don't think they're really staffed accordingly, so they rely on folks like in the monitoring category or in some of these, like more advanced technology software categories to kind of push that change into the shops. And at the end of the day, they're trying to move iron and sell machine tools.
Go back 5 years and look at the amount of OEMs that, go back 5-10 years, right? But when it comes to like their own branded OEM automation system, pallet pool, right? Go back and look at that. And the numbers are significantly different today as far as what they have as an offering versus, even I don't know, Nick, 5 years ago, I don't think that's going back that far. And
no.
I could name several top brands that didn't have their own like pallet solution,
Yeah.
So maybe it's that. Maybe it's a time play at this point. And the ROI is certainly there. The industry just needs to catch up.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Dave, you made the point earlier, like the end user needs to take ownership over how they're going to get to the next level as well.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be the technology providers and, the hardware or the software providers pushing this through. It needs to be the end user assigning somebody and thinking about the business results they're trying to achieve. We talk a lot about like OEE and like really important KPIs that most people don't even have the ability to capture in their shop. And so if you're doing that, then naturally you're going to start thinking about automation, and you're going to start thinking about some of this IoT stuff that we talk about. You're absolutely going to be utilizing monitoring because it's the only way to get OEE. So, I think you got to kind of own it at the end user level, and then on the other side of it, on the technology providers level, you need to be able to speak to that person and understand what they're going through and basically how to run continuous improvement at the end user level. And so then now you've got like shared goals that you can try to achieve as a team.
Yeah, great thoughts. Totally agree.
So guys, I love your idea to like always leave the audience with 3 practical takeaways. And so, for this episode and for those that listen to Making Chips, we've been doing so much in combination with Modern Machine Shop's Top Shops and that whole conference that we'll be at next month. I would say it's really important to understand what the top shops are doing, in terms of their technology and their culture and what they care about and what they measure. So really understand the gap between where you're at and what the top shops are doing. And then from there, what do you think we do next? What's the second practical takeaway?
I think really just getting out there, right? Getting out to the shows, doing a little bit of Googling when time allows, but yeah, getting out, seeing what's available on the monitoring side. You'd be amazed. There's some really cool spins on it available now, and they're represented well at all these shows. We were just at West Tech a couple of weeks ago, and there was a healthy supply of them there. So really starting to learn not only what's out there, but what might be a great fit for your shop.
Yeah, it's one thing to know like where you're at versus your peers, and it's another thing to know like what technology is available and how to close that gap. So
yeah,
I think that's the second step.
And if you can't make it out to those trade shows, you can get some really awesome summaries about what's going on at the trade shows by listening to podcasts like this. So thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the Lights Out podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your shop who's ready to level up their automation game. And of course, you can find all our episodes and other fun things at makingchips.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. But until next time, keep your spindles turning, your automation learning, and your lights out.